wanted to get you quickly on the Medicaid and DOJ lawsuit.
Another day, another lawsuit.
Do you think it's unfounded?
Absolutely.
And will the state fight it? All right, thank you.
America, $11 billion federal lawsuit filed today. 350,000 caregivers, sons, daughters, neighbors, paid to keep disabled and elderly New Yorkers out of nursing homes. The DOJ walked into Brooklyn federal court and said the contract that runs the whole thing was absolutely rigged. A sham bidding process, a pre-selected Georgia company, millions in allegedly stolen taxpayer money, and the patients, the federal prosecutor's exact words, cast to the curb. 30 seconds, a wave, and a closed car door. She didn't say the people who caught it were not Republicans. They were her own Democratic state senators in Albany. What they found in a hearing room in August of 2025 is sitting in a federal complaint that dropped today, and it's the most damning part of this entire 60 pages.
Well, tonight, the U.S. Justice Department is suing New York State, alleging a Medicaid fraud scheme tied to the state's $10 billion consumer-directed personal assistance program, or CDPAP. The home care program serves people with disabilities and others with significant medical needs. Last year, the state overhauled the system, replacing hundreds of payment companies with a single company. And now, federal officials claim the contract process was rigged and that millions in taxpayer dollars were improperly spent. The lawsuit now seeks to stop the alleged fraud and recover all those funds. The state health department responded, calling the lawsuit baseless.
What is up, guys? TYSON DELACRUZ here. Thank you so much for rocking with me. June 16th, 2026, Eastern District of New York. Trump's DOJ named 3 defendants: the New York State Department of Health, Medicaid Director Amir Basari, and the Public Partnership LLC, a private equity-backed company out of Georgia. The target, the CDPAP program, which is Consumer Direct Personal Assistance. Medicaid pays family members and neighbors to provide home health care services for disabled and elderly New Yorkers so they can stay out of nursing homes. Cheaper for the state, better for the patient, covers roughly 280,000 people. In 2024, Hochul announced that she was consolidating the roughly 600 to 700 local companies that processed payroll for those caregivers into a single statewide vendor. The pitch here was to cut fraud and to save billions and billions of dollars a year. Her own team called the old system a racket. The federal lawsuit calls Hochul's solution the Racket. I'm going to read this directly from an article from the New York Post. So go ahead and pop up article overlay A for me. New York headline here. The New York Post headline: Fed sues Hochul's office, claims massive fraud scheme in revamp New York's $11 billion Medicaid program. The 60-page complaint uses the term sham bid process. Over 100 companies applied to run this contract. 4 passed the qualification screening. The qualification criteria that a vendor had to already be running a statewide home care program in other states. This happened to disqualify every existing New York company. PPL, the Georgia-based company that won, had no prior New York experience, but obviously cleared the bar. PPL's own internal presentation described their bid in their own words here as recklessly low. They deliberately underbid, not profitable, and counted on Hochul's office to force the insurance plan to pay them at a higher rate after they won the bid. The calculation is in the federal complaint here. The DOJ is now asking a federal judge to freeze PPL's revenue and install a federal receiver to take over the company's operations.
And these other red states are having population increases, right?
And they're keeping their budgets smaller than ours.
That's correct. Way smaller, actually. Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Isn't our New York City budget bigger than in the entire state of Florida?
Yes.
You got 1 out of every 3 New Yorkers on Medicaid.
That's wild.
Is that what it is? 1 out of 3?
That's what I'm
Wow.
seeing.
Oh, I didn't know it.
I mean, like, just think
Incredible.
Go up from a budget for a second. New York is an incredibly wealthy state, and it's 2026. How in the world are 1 in 3 New Yorkers on Medicaid?
The quote from the AAG, the other prosecutor, Colin McDonald of the National Fraud Enforcement Division, used 3 words that did not make most of the coverage of this. It was the phrase cast to the curb. It's a very harsh phrase here. That is the federal government's documented description on what happened to 280,000 disabled people when the transition absolutely failed. Now, here's exactly how bad the failure was. The statement in the complaint described it as willful misrepresentation here. The New York Post article from the January 13, 2025, after the transition window opened, only 43 of 214,000 people in PPL system have completed or had completed per PPL records unveiled in this lawsuit. Okay, so we're talking about 43 out of 214,000. 3 days after the number existed in PPL's own internal records, Health Commissioner James McDonald released a public statement here. This is James McDonald's statement per the New York Post. The facts and data show that the transition is proceeding effectively and efficiently, or efficiently and effectively, excuse me. The federal complaint classifies the statement as absolutely false and misleading representation to Congress and federal health authorities. Not an optimistic read of uncertain data here. This is absolutely false because the data obviously existed. The statement directly contradicted 3 days later. Hochul's framing today, Trump's DOJ weaponized the courts against legal procurement to score political points before the November election. This is the trend here. This is what Trump does. This is what he does. Hochul's spokesperson told Politico, and I'll pop it up on the screen here so I can read it verbatim, just another sad attempt by the Trump administration to weaponize the justice system to attack political opponents in an election year. That defense requires explaining something that nobody at her press shop addressed today. The person who caught the no-bid contract attempt first was not a Republican, you guys. He was not federal. He was, in fact, indeed, a Democratic state senator by the name of James Skoufis, co-chairing an Albany oversight hearing in August of 2025. I probably butchered his last name, but you guys get it here. Pop the overlay of Skoufis. No bid, not fast-tracked, not a shortened timeline, a draft piece of legislation that would have handed $10 billion contracts to a company from Georgia with no New York experience before the request for proposals, the RFP, was ever even issued. The draft didn't pass, but the same August hearing, PPL's vice president, Patty Byers, testified under oath that there had been no conversations between PPL and the Department of Health before the budget actually passed. 1 week later, on August 29th, she sent a written letter reversing that testimony, admitting general communications with the Department of Health staff in late March and early April. An email confirmed that Medicaid Director Amir Basari, a named defendant in that lawsuit that was mentioned earlier, was personally represented at the April 4th meeting with PPL. No conversations, you guys, no general communications. Then all of a sudden, the director was coincidentally in the room. The sequence is what the Democratic senator documented, and it is what the DOJ complaint is actually built from. And now this, before the federal government filed a single document, you guys, two private companies were already in federal court alleging the identical bid manipulation. Freedom Care filed in November 2022. Mark's Home Care filed in December 2022. Both alleged the process was absolutely rigged. The DOJ arrived 4 years later after the private sector already told the story. And then there was a union official by the name of Ronan Shapiro, a vice president at 1199 SEIU, allegedly told home healthcare agency representatives on a June Zoom call that PPL would win the contract. This was 2 months before the bidding process officially closed. The DOJ was the last to show up. Her own Democratic colleagues and two private companies were already on the record before the federal government moved in. Now, listen to what the New York Medicaid program looks like from the outside here, because the context makes the alleged inside job a lot a lot harder to excuse.
New York spends more than $100 billion a year on Medicaid. That's the second highest in the nation. New York's average spending on each beneficiary is over $12,500. That's 36% higher than the national average.
36% higher than any other state average per beneficiary every year. The program the DOJ alleges was rigged is not some small line item. It is a $10 billion slice of a $100 billion operation that, by every external measurement, has been leaking money for absolute decades. Just dripping, okay? That context is why the "we're saving money" defense sounds like the way it does when you're simultaneously accused of running a sham bid process to install a vendor that went recklessly below cost and planned to make it up later on. But here, my friends, is what changes the entire frame of this case. I've walked you through the fraud allegations. Now I'm going to show you the specific internal decision documented in the federal complaint that turned a failed vendor transition situation into something a lot harder for Hochul to try to explain, because this one is not a billing error here. It is an actual choice in writing that Hochul, her office, actually made. PPL asked for one more time after winning the contract. They went back to the state and said the new transition window, 3 months, was not enough here. They requested a total of 9 months. They were scrambling to hire staff. The system obviously wasn't ready here. Go ahead and pop up that article on the screen here so we can read this. It says, "We will not be advancing statutory or regulatory changes." That is an internal state email from the health department official directly to PPL, blocking the extension request of 9 months that they were talking about. The date was locked April 1st, 2025. That decision is what drove 214,000 people into a system that had processed 43 of them 1 week in. The program those 240,000 people depend on is not some abstract policy debate here. It is the reason that a 78-year-old woman with Parkinson's disease has somebody show up at 7 a.m. to help her get out of bed. When the caregiver's paychecks stop arriving because the process system absolutely failed and gets nuked, she doesn't get out of bed. She calls her adult child in panic. The adult child calls the hotline. The hotline runs for hours. This played out across New York State in early 2025 on a scale of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people simultaneously here. Listen how an attorney described who the CDPAP program was actually designed to protect, because this is the population that the actual federal complaint says was cast to the curb.
This is a program that is put in place to help care for people at their home instead of having them go in nursing homes.
Attorney John Flynn says while New York's Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program, or CDPAP, is meant to make things easier for loved ones who need care, it's also become the target of sophisticated scammers.
The actual program itself is for a good cause. But you have bad people out there who are taking advantage of federal and state money.
A good program run under allegedly corrupt procurement, protected by a commissioner who publicly called the disaster effective, while internally the numbers showed 43 out of 240,000 people. Hochul called the CDPAP a racket, and she's absolutely right about that. There was a documented fraud about that old system, but the solution that Hochul chose allegedly created an actual new problem. A vendor selected through a process rigged to exclude the competition, given a contract that they deliberately underbid, protected from timeline relief from her office, while the compliance data was publicly misrepresented. You don't get to build a fire and then act surprised and be surprised when the federal government shows up with the smoke report. The accountability now sits in the Brooklyn federal judge, a receiver request and eventually a proceeding where Amir Basari and the Department of Health will have to explain the gap between what they published and what they actually knew. America, 14 months. That's how long has passed since April 1st, 2025, a deadline Hochul's office refused to push back. 14 months of disabled disabled New Yorkers operating inside a system the federal government now alleges was built to serve a Georgia company. Obviously not them. The private suit started in 2022. A Democratic state senator documented a no-bid draft in 2025. The DOJ complaint landed just a few days ago in 2026. The patients have been waiting through all of it. Hochul's public defense will be, this is Trump weaponizing the Justice Department before the election. That argument requires explaining, while the most damaging receipts are in the actual complaint. The August 2025 Albany hearing with Barnes' testimony, reversal, and Basari's meeting were documented, and they were documented by her own party in her own state before the administration was even ever involved in this particular case. This, my friends, is obviously the same playbook that they run. Announce reform, claim that they're going to save people money, suppress failure numbers, and call the accountability partisan. And 1 in 3 New Yorkers on Medicaid, the ones paying the taxes and relying on the actual program, kept waiting for somebody to explain on which 2 documents are the actual truth here. The one that said proceeding efficiently, or the one that simply just showed 43 out of 214,000. Patients got cast to the curb. Her office blocked the extension. Her commissioner called it efficient. The only thing that took way too long was the actual lawsuit. Let me know what you guys think about this. Drop it down in the comment section down below. Smash the like button if you kindly would. Share, subscribe, and as always, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.